So I would like to welcome all of you to our May meetup for Write the Docs. And I've been excited about this meetup ever since I saw Anne's book was released. We tried to do it in April, but May was the month. And I have actually had the privilege of working with all three of these wonderful people. And I learned a lot from all of them. Anne, I first heard of Anne when she was doing wiki stuff at BMC. I stumbled across her on the internet, and then I got her book, Collaborative Communities. Am I saying the title?
It's
yes.
way too long
yes.
of a title.
Anyway, yes, Conversations and Community. But anyway, that was her first book, which was really awesome. And Docs Like Code is about a lot of collaboration, and so I think she's kind of continued in this vein. She is currently a product manager at Cisco, and I'll let her talk more about the details. And she's been very active in the OpenStack documentation. And she was actually the PTL lead for OpenStack for several years. And so most people in the technical writing community are very familiar with Anne and her great work. And she's done a lot of teaching and fostering of great technical writing and processes and techniques. So it's really an honor to have her here. And then the next person is Diane Fleming. And I actually met Diane when the first week I started at Rackspace. And Diane is currently one of the lead API writers at PayPal. And the PayPal API docs are awesome. And they're getting more awesome. When I first learned about APIs, PayPal was one of the documentation libraries that I kind of started to use and kind of copy and learn from. And so I've watched it evolve over the last 4 years, and they've really done some amazing work. And Diane has both a developer background and a technical writing background, and she does more work in a shorter period of time than anyone I had ever met. But anyway, so again, it's also an honor to have Diane here. And then finally, we have Kelly. And Kelly is the unique technical editor. I never had a technical editor until I went to IBM. And then I came to Rackspace and I met Kelly. And having a technical editor is amazing. She has many years of experience as a technical editor for BMC and also for Rackspace. And if you want to find a really great style guide to learn from, there's one at github.com, Labs. Docs-Rackspace, and I refer to it all the time in my new job. So again, an honor to have Kelly here, and I'm really excited about the panel, and I hope we have a great discussion after. And I'm going to turn it over to Anne now.
Awesome.
Thank you, Margaret. Thanks for the introduction. Appreciate it. Hey, advance that slide one bump. Thanks. That'll just give everybody our names. Okay, super simple deck tonight. You can click for us, sure, thanks. And thanks everybody for coming. This is exciting, kind of little homecoming at Rackspace. I like it. And I'm appreciative that y'all sort of said where you're coming from as you sit here. That helps us shape this because this is super casual, super informal. Please ask questions, but we have some stuff that people who prepared did. So Diane and Kelly did an awesome job. Like we went to lunch, we talked through what we wanted to talk about. So, I'm just going to kind of start with context setting that Docs Like Code is huge, right? And even just like the impetus for this book was I went from Rackspace where we did a bunch of transformation. Actually, it was like OpenStack transformation, Rackspace transformation. Then I went to Cisco and I'm trying to transform myself, right? So I'm trying to learn how do people manage products and how do you make people like your products? And of course, it turns out docs are a huge part of that, right? So if you can use documentation as if it's part of your product, that's going to make your product all the better. So what I kind of looked around and then had to train another set of writers at Cisco, and I was like, there's nothing to teach people this kind of stuff with. You learn it, you're on your own, you're on, the internet, Googling mostly. And what I also found is that if I had developers I was sitting next to or on Slack where I could ask them questions, then I was going to be more successful. So that was kind of the impetus of this book because Diane had to do the same thing. She had to train tech writers at a couple different places on how to use Git for docs or how to work with developers. Tana's evidence of this technique working. And then the other component that I think is really important is that Kelly could give us workflows and quality checks and the kind of things that you really do care about when you start to publish documentation professionally, that just gave it that extra set of polish and professionalism, right? Like there's a reason there's paid tech writing and paid writing. So that gives a little bit of background. And I'm going to turn it over to these two because they did a really good job. Like Margaret came up with a lot of questions that let us then talk amongst ourselves about how we might address them. And so the idea is that we can all bring our own stories, and then hold your questions till the end and feel free to ask you can direct a question to Kelly, the editor, whatever you're thinking of, that's fine too. But go ahead. You're going to do a timer and everything? Awesome.
I am. What up?
Do it. All right.
I'm gonna keep
Diane. Good.
Give it to me. All right. Here we go. All right. I was going to tell a tech writer joke, but there are none. So I'm going to tell another joke, which is, and it's clean enough for this environment. Anyway, Ma and Pa Kettle go to the doctor, elderly couple, and Pa Kettle helps Ma Kettle get back into the doctor and leaves her there. The doctor's doing his exam, and he says, okay, well, do you guys still have intercourse? And she kind of looks at him, and she yells out to the waiting room, Pa, do we still have intercourse? And he says, no, we have Blue Cross Blue Shield. All right, that's the joke. Okay, so, and if you don't have Blue Cross Blue Shield, how do people navigate the GitHub learning curve? That's the question. Okay, so for most writers, the learning curve is steep for GitHub, and not just writers, developers too, I think. Anyway, traditionally, writers use a locking content management system where you have, like Perforce or SVN, and you have control of your files, and no one else can touch them, and you own your content. And to make updates, reviewers use the traditional review cycle where they give, in a review meeting or email or so forth, they give comments, and then the writer will incorporate that. But with GitHub, it's a whole new world, and writers have to conquer several challenges. They have to break free of the ownership of content. And for myself, that was a super hard one, and I see that over and over again with writers. They don't get that. And they have to tackle the command line. They have to learn new GitHub workflows. And even if you learn a workflow at one company, you're going to have to learn another workflow at another company. So it's transferable to a point, but not all the way. You have to break work into smaller chunks because pull requests in GitHub are best done when you have a specific, discrete piece of work. That's also hard because writers are used to kind of revamping an entire book. You have to manage input from multiple reviewers at once, and it's different than like having a review meeting in a room. You're kind of being bombarded, and they may not all agree. And then finally, you have to experience public reviews rather than a private email review, which is it's a change. So, yes. The next question was, how much success have you had getting people unfamiliar with coding tools to contribute content? And I'd say that I work at PayPal. I didn't give my intro. I work at PayPal. Well, you did, Margaret. And I work on REST API docs. The project leads and managers have to build in enough time for ramp up. Every time we bring on new writers, we have to teach them GitHub. We have to teach them our own version of our workflow. We have to teach them a whole multitude of things. And but there's not just the technical piece. We also have to teach people, you don't own a book. Forget that. And even though you have to deliver a book, you don't own it. So that's a kind of a difficult thing to convey. And a lot of writers become real frustrated, and I think it mainly has to do with a lack of training and enough ramp-up time. And I think the best approach is to kind of throw writers into an open source project and let them kind of learn by fire, like just throw them in the deep end of the pool and have a little apprenticeship. That the people I know who've really taken to GitHub, that's what they did. They didn't just try to learn on site in their job. They kind of ventured beyond that. The worst case is an isolated writer who's trying to learn on his or her own. Next question, are there any benefits that someone in a writer or non-developer role learning this, are there any benefits to this approach that, oh, I don't know what that question means. Anyway.
What are the benefits?
I don't know what that question is. Anyway, the biggest advantage is the cross-training that occurs when in the multiple contributor model. In other words, developers learn from writers how to write, and writers learn from developers how to code. I've seen more than one writer become interested in coding scripts and automating parts of the writing process, and that's exciting. And I've also seen a lot of developers who have a lot of technical content to share, or maybe English is not their first language, but they're really interested in sharing their technical expertise, learning how to write and convey complex information very simply. So I see a big benefit. And also, I think another benefit is writers get the respect of developers. And as a woman writer, if you didn't notice that part, I've worked in this field for way too long, and that's been a challenge because the tech side has been a lot of male developers, and traditionally tech writers have been women, and besides just not respecting the whole writing part of it, the male-female thing has been a little bit challenging, and I think learning GitHub has kind of kicked up my status a little bit, and I appreciate that. Disadvantages, does the docs-like code approach have any detrimental effect on documentation quality and completion? And yes. Not ultimately, but initially, yes. I've seen writers miss deadlines because they don't know how to get their pull requests merged. And I've also, and especially with things that are based in code, like if you have text strings that are in the code itself, like error messages or prompts, it's sort of, developers aren't used to having that kind of input necessarily, and so there's kind of like a lot of dragging of feet. And also, on the other side, when developers try to contribute to the writing, to the content, they may not understand the information architecture or the organization, and they can kind of blow that out of the water. So on both sides, there needs to be some ramp up and some training. And ultimately, if that happens, the content improves and the organization improves. And sometimes in a time crunch, the technical additions to the content will have a higher value than just improving the writing. And so poorly written tech content gets patched onto dev sites, sometimes over improved writing. Oh, my stupid timer. Okay, well, anyway, I'll give you one last thought. Even highly technical people have a hard time moving over to a GitHub approach. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, but sorry, I got lost in my own mess here. Ultimately, I think the biggest value of writers doing docs-like code is your value increases in the whole organization, and the beneficiary of all that is the customer. Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Yay. Thanks, Diane. And, I had even forgotten how hard it is sometimes to get something merged. So all of that reminded me, oh yeah, this is tough stuff. So take that with you for sure. Kelly.
Okay. Got to talk into the mic. I'm Kelly Holcomb. I'd be interested to know who here currently or in the past has worked with an editor. Oh, okay. So this, I'm not a strange creature. I'm not a unicorn. But so, as Anne said, I mean, my focus in helping with the book and my whole professional career is on quality. And so, I mean, we get very focused on the tools and the tool chain and the publishing and all of that, and the new way of doing things, the latest craze, Docs like code. It's storming the internet. But I think that this could be my bias, but I think that we also need to keep in mind that I don't think the ultimate goal has changed. And I think that is that we're creating quality, usable content for our audiences. I mean, if we're not doing that, I don't know why we're here. So, like I said, maybe I'm biased given my profession and my passion, but I can't believe that that's any less of a goal than it ever has been. Not always achievable, given deadlines, but it's our goal, right? To create, quality, usable content. And at least at Rackspace, we've made the transition to treating docs like code. And in the transition to that environment, the insistence on quality hasn't changed. And it's probably because we still have a dedicated docs team, experienced managers and writers who are in control of the process. So quality is still important, thank goodness, or I'd be laid off by now. But so, kind of the question posed to me is, what's the role of the editor in this new paradigm? And I definitely think there's a role for editors to play. In fact, I think it might even be a greater role than we played before. At the heart of it, the role of the editor is still about creating standards and enforcing them to help create usable content. But how have I seen the editor's role change when you use this paradigm? And I joke that I was very sheltered for most of my career. For the first 17 years of it, I worked exclusively with writers. The writers would go off and work with developers and product teams, but I got to work just with my little team of writers, and it was awesome because writers are great. One or two of them over the years, maybe not so much, but of course, and I learned to use all the processes, all the tools, starting with FrameMaker and RoboHelp and all that stuff. But I was rather privileged that I got to work with writing professionals who made the content good before I got to go in and make it better. Because that's what I like to do, is go in and make things better. But in this new collaborative model, I am interacting with developers on a regular basis, and even providing editorial feedback. What are you doing?
Giving you a slide.
Oh, a slide. Yay. Oh.
Now we know what you're talking about.
It wasn't clear from my talking what I was talking about. Darn it. I'll try harder. So I am interacting with developers on a regular basis, even providing editorial feedback directly to them without having a writer in the middle. And it's definitely pushed me out of my comfort zone. And I'm unique here because you all are used to working with developers and product teams, but I never was. So, and I think, I can kind of describe the experience and what I think is important about, maintaining quality in this sort of new environment by giving you an example. It's my trial by fire that happened here at Rackspace in late 2015. And all at once, I had to learn GitHub and, for the very first time in my life, work exclusively with developers who were writing documentation. And it was all on a top priority, highly visible project with an insane deadline. And I literally sat at my desk and wept, mostly over GitHub, but over other things too. And I do have to give a shout out to Anne. She was hugely patient with me, and she sat down. She was one of many people who sat down and patiently showed me how to create a PR on the command line. I don't do that anymore. You can actually use GitHub for the most part, with UI tools. So if you're don't be afraid of be afraid of the command line. Don't be afraid of the command line. But I overcame it to a certain extent. But the reason I was the main docs person on this project is that developers were producing the content. They didn't need writers. We had writers produce maybe 10% of the content for that project. It was all produced by developers, but they knew they wanted quality content. So they didn't call in a writer, they called in the editor. So that's how I got to be in that unique position, and I've been in that position on different projects ever since. So the first thing I do is, hey, devs, here's our style guide. And it's a tome that I've written over the years since I've been here. And I don't know how many pages it is because we've never printed it out, but it's got a lot of information. And developers, I don't think they looked at it, not once. So I had to end up creating an extremely condensed version, kind of a top 12 things you need to pay attention to when you write, So what was really the most important thing for them to know as they were writing their content? I ended up that I had to be a lot more explicit and diplomatic in my feedback than I'd been in a long time. Writers kind of get used to being harassed by their editor. But I couldn't take that for granted. And I had to have a few discussions explaining why we should do things in a certain way, why we should write things in a certain way, present them, organize them in a certain way, because people who don't write for a living, they don't know these things necessarily because they haven't done them before. So some discussions about this is why we do it this way. And a little bit of, like, well, but do we, yes, we have to do it. But mainly, the main thing I do all day long is deliver editorial feedback. I edit stuff. So developers, I found, aren't used to the kind of detailed feedback that you write, that writers are used to getting, a developmental plus a copy edit all at once, just read everywhere. And, we still have some groups at Rackspace where developers create content, writers take it, they put it into RST or Markdown or whatever, and they make it better, good, and then I get to make it better, and I give my editorial feedback to the writers. So that's what the kind of paradigm I'm used to. But one of the main things I've had to tackle in this new paradigm is how do I deliver editing to developers? My MO for editing is to copy the content to a Word doc and use the track changes and commenting features, because honestly, there's really no better way to show a lot of inline changes. You have your comments, you have your questions, it's just a really easy way to consume changes, except we're not writing in Word. So, developers don't want to necessarily take the time to enter edits. They want to merge, they want to approve and merge. They want to move on. And so I'm often called upon to deliver my edits in PRs. So I create a PR, not from the command line anymore, but I still do it. But that can get really messy and confusing because there's the diffs and then there's the separate comments and it's really hard. And, edits are never intended to be accepted blindly. But scrutinizing each one to see if you want to accept it and then merge, it's gotten to be, it's a little untenable. I mean, I've had developers recently ask me to create separate PRs for my edits for each individual paragraph. So that would make it easy for them to accept them and merge them, because I think, as Diane mentioned, you mentioned something about it and I can't remember what it was. The pieces, the chunk. I mean, that's the way they code. That's the best practices for coding, but we don't write. I mean, we write in chunks, but it's all meant to be consumed, in a bigger piece. So we're still trying to figure it out. And so what we say in the book, at the end, the very end, where we talk about quality for a minute, is, the key is flexibility. You can get most people to agree that they want the finished product to be of high quality, but the path to get there with each contributor, with each project, can be a little bit different. And so that's one thing that we've had to do is just stay really flexible about how we work with the different contributors. So I don't know if that was 8 minutes, but that's my wheelhouse. So now for the real show, the woman that you came to see tonight. We're the warm-up act. That's right. All right. The one, the only, and gentle.
There you go.
Thank you. Thanks. And I mean, just to give credit where it's due, I had this idea, right? And I was like, I can't quite bring it over the finish line. I'm not that great of a writer. I need an editor. That's how I wrote my first book, right? And Diane already had a lot of teaching experience and the experience with well, what questions do people ask and what can't they figure out? And so without these two, this book would never exist. Believe me, it's just, a labor of collaboration. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so, I mean, partially what I wanted to talk about also, not just sort of like to give credit where credit's due, but also I wanted to keep practicing using GitHub. And I had, probably I was like 5 years in with OpenStack, but it wasn't using GitHub. And so there's a difference. And I mean, people who work at Atlassian, right? I have only used GitLab once. I've used Bitbucket twice. And so there's this entire ecosystem of more things to learn. So yes, we're talking about GitHub, and after Diane read an early draft, she's like, you're writing a marketing document for GitHub, I was like, okay, yes, internal people at GitHub, if you ever want to copy this for your marketing materials, that would be awesome. But there is this huge ecosystem of a Git at the center, right? And so that's the original from Linus Torvalds, created out of Fire, where something really broke with their source control management and they made this other thing. And so these other UIs have popped up on top of that. So I think that's partially why this book has to be kind of an overview to start with. And the tool we ended up using was Gitbook. And come to find out, I couldn't get Gitbook to export an EPUB that Lulu would accept to publish, right? So I just see opportunity. Okay, so now I'm putting my product manager hat on, and I'm like, there's opportunity. I could write an automation script that would let people automatically export from Gitbook to an EPUB that Lulu will publish, right? So I just see so much potential here, and I know I'm looking at the choir, you're there, right? Now some of the rest of you might be like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? And that's another reason to bring this book forward, to make sure that people know it's accessible. It's not just for writers. It's not just for developers. It's not just for people who script. It's not just for database administrators, right? And I happen to know GitHub's working on a version for kids. So there are things that, I think that we just need to expand our reach. If product managers could write their own docs, how amazing would that be, right? So that's the kind of message that I want to keep bringing forward as we, the Write to the Docs community, continue to outreach to, a broader group. Let's not do the technical hierarchy of like, well, you're a Python developer, but the Java developer is more technical, and you're a database administrator, but a Linux administrator is more technical. Like, there's all these ordering games that go on, with all of this. And so, like, another message to bring is just that, like, let's use these tools that are level setting for this tech industry that we're in that happens to be super hierarchical for whatever reason, and it's really awful, and we can be the change we want to see, right? So, gosh, I sound really like I'm trying to set a vision for this thing that isn't an us versus them, or these are the cool kids tools. I'm not, that is not the intent at all. So, and I guess the other thing I wanted to bring, so that's sort of my like product angle on this, is like, like Tana and I were talking the other day, what would help someone who uses GitHub for Docs to understand if they're doing it well or where they could improve, right? And so I think there's a whole nother set of tooling we could write that's not automation tooling, but like best practices tooling and improvement tooling, and what are the metrics that make you're doing your docs right or better, or how do you get better? Let's find those ideas. And the other goal is the docslikeCode.com website. I've got sourced from GitHub itself. So if anybody has a story to tell about something successful, I'd love to hear a fail story. What went wrong and why? Let's tell these stories. So thank you, Rachel, for PR number 1 on the Docs Like Code Stories repo, where she was able to say, this is the transformation we made. This is how long it took. This is how many files are in it. And so we can start to dissect these examples. They're not just my OpenStack examples over 5 years, and they're not just, our Rackspace examples, which we need the use case for, right? So anybody who wants to write these, please, collaborate together. Let's get these stories told. Let's talk to each other about what worked and what didn't. I mean, I'm going to talk a little vulnerably about what's happening in OpenStack today, right? Like, we had a group of tech writers. They happen to be funded in a certain way. They are now laid off. And so how is the OpenStack community that was working in this way going to fill in those gaps and recover from that kind of business decision that had nothing to do with our tooling, nothing to do with the people? how do we, come together out of that and still manage the documentation for this huge open source project, right? There's over 30 REST APIs. There's a ton of projects. So I feel like there's a lot of, even by, telling our stories, we're able to talk to each other honestly about what works, what doesn't. How can we get better individually about this, as we practice these techniques, and especially students, just know that, this is all trial and error, but some stuff really sticks. Like when I can look up metrics for OpenStack and realize we merged 900 changes and they were actually published live to a website, like that stuff blows me away. And just seeing growing from 70 some contributors to 200 contributors and more, like these are the kinds of things where I know we're onto something, and I'm just really interested in seeing where it takes us, where it goes. So yeah, what else? I wanted to talk a little bit about disruption, and I think there's two areas where there's gonna be some disruption going on, right? Like one is the actual jobs themselves. So if you cling to a role of being the lone writer for this one deliverable, your job could be disrupted by the idea that, well, developers can write that, right? And so what I think we all have to sort of give yourself a shot in the arm, right? These two told stories about having to transform and just be ready to do that if you need to. And then I think there's disruption in the tooling. So you guys actually made fun of me one week and it was really hilarious. I'd never taken this perspective, but I was like, okay, I've been working in open source tooling, especially for documentation, for years now. I have not laid money on the table or tried to provide a budget for any documentation tool for years. And I was like, man, I might have to pay for a Google custom search engine. What? So all of these things have come out of other people's budgets or whatnot. And so I think that there's also disruption in the tools, right? How long is Adobe going to be able to prove the value of a tool that costs $1,000+ a seat? When was the last time a developer put up with seat licensing for anything? So these are also the disruptions that I think we're all kind of keeping an eye out for, and why sometimes telling these stories feels a little like I could argue against myself too, where I'm like, oh man, do people think they're going to lose their jobs because of this new way of thinking and new way of looking at tech writing? Do we also have developers who are like, man, I used to just hand this to these very capable people who wrote beautiful things. Now you think I'm going to do that? And so it's happening everywhere. And so that's what else I just want to bring to the table is like the disruption is something that we have to be empathetic with each other about and, be ready to, show the value on any side and show the benefits. So, all right, with that. I don't even know if I talked 8 minutes, but we're right on schedule. Okay, cool. Yeah, open it up to questions. And Laura, do you want to run the mic, or do you want to run a mic? Or yeah, okay. We have a mic runner, and I'll try to repeat them too. But yep, questions.
Raise your hand.
I'm old and want to ask mine before I forget them because I've already forgotten what I was going to say to Kelly. So maybe they're not so much questions. Is that working?
There you go.
Not so much questions, but observations that everything I've heard you say is spot on with what we're experiencing at Magenta, which you know, Diane. What you were saying, Anne, about making it a level playing field. The story I told about the young woman in Las Vegas, the marketing girl that did the PR, she was so excited. Yesterday, one of our product managers did it. He wanted to fix something really fast. He frankly didn't want to wait for us writers. He did a PR. He was super excited.
Awesome.
So it is really cool that it's a level playing field. Everyone can do it.
And I don't mean to make hierarchy about product managers or marketing people either. Like, we have to be careful of that, right?
Yeah.
Because
I was doing that. I was saying a young marketing woman. I
right,
was
like,
doing it.
yeah, right. I catch myself doing it. And that's, I think I've got more awareness of it, well, as I age in tech too.
Yeah, and as I
so
hear
yeah,
myself
it's
say
like,
that.
yeah.
But that was a great point. And then the other thing is about community. We've had a really fun time at Magento having a public repo where people, it's almost more the conversation. Sure, they'll fix a typo, they'll add a sentence. We've even had a couple people write full topics, but it's more the conversation. We've developed this community now over the last year and a half where people will jump in and moderate. Maybe someone opens a very deeply technical PR and I'm just looking at it going, oh my God, I don't even know which book this impacts. I don't know how to write about this. And one of our community members will jump in and say, well, actually, Alan Storm, it's like this. And if you checked out this doc, it's like this. And sort of help us tech writers navigate those very deeply technical areas.
And I not to interrupt, but that is a point that I always come back to. Like, I one of the Write the Doc podcasts, one of the people on there was like, I'm so stressed, I can't keep up with everything, and I'm like, you have to find techniques that let you spread this out. Like, you will go crazy,
Right.
and that's a perfect example of, like, the tech writers can't know everything, the developers probably can't know everything either. Can you tell the story about when you got people in a room and they argued politely?
Yeah.
Or was it not so politely?
It was not so politely, and it was in Russian, and I was angry. So we had a crisis with some code that we put out called UI components that were supposed to be an easy way to drag and drop and put fields and UI components on a storefront. But it wasn't very well designed. It wasn't very well architected. So I made an excuse to fly over to Kyiv and sit with the developers for a week and have them explain to myself and another writer how they worked. And the other writer speaks Russian. So we were going to spend the week doing that. The first full day was spent with the 3 developers arguing in Russian about how they should be used. They coded it, they built it, they designed it, and they're arguing about how it should work.
That's awesome. Okay. Love that story.
But that community input. And the other thing we found is when we attach like parasites onto hackathons, and we do docathons as part of it. There are people that go to hackathons that are nervous. Maybe their coding chops aren't up to skill. So like, oh, okay, I'll come write with you. Surely that's easier. They find out quickly it's not.
Little do they know.
Yeah. But that's another really interesting way for people who want to be part of a community but are nervous about coding. They can start out with the so-called easy stuff of writing, and then they eventually will start also contributing to the code base.
And if the model is the same, what we found in OpenStack is then they are ready to contribute code.
Yes.
Or it can go the reverse. Hey, docs aren't different than code. Do it the same.
Right.
You know everything.
Though there is a lot of psychology, like I was saying earlier, is interesting. They use GitHub, the developers use it the same way the writers do, but yet they look at our repo in fear. It's like, I don't know, maybe it's fear of the English language. I don't know.
It is. And actually for English second language people, I've had the conversation where they were shamed as a child or as a student. And so it's harder for them to put a public PR out there. And
right.
Yeah, we actually in our OpenStack contributor guide really recently added a section about how to approach English second language and how we want as contributors to think about it. Articulate, speak slower.
Yes.
Don't assume time zones are the same around the world. And
right.
I'm really curious to see if it makes a difference.
The one last thing I wanted to share is the use of templates. For us, having a template, having and this is something I learned from Kelly as a great editor. We provide templates, and we have a contributor's guide that people can go to, and they can learn how to contribute, how to fork, and how to clone the repo. And then just have those templates there in Markdown, and they just plug in the information, and it's increased our PRs for sure. So, yeah, y'all have been a big inspiration for me at Magento. Thank you.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks.
Ask other people. Kelly, I think you mentioned earlier that your role as an editor in this docs-like code paradigm is perhaps larger than it was before. Right. And I wanted to ask, if in your opinion, do you think that writers' roles have changed to look more like an editor's role? And are there really 2 distinct roles? And if so, how do they differ?
Yeah, I think, in fact, my manager said, you need to write up what your editing process is, because a lot of the writers are going to be kind of doing the same thing that you're doing, and I mean, you can't do it all, so I think that the roles might be shifting a little bit. But one example that I had that I didn't talk about is, like the example I had with the developers, my first experience with it, we were just creating standalone articles that were going into a sort of a knowledge base. There was no nav pane, there was no organization, there was no real good navigation and linking among the articles. It was just pretty much, standalone stuff. But we just now got done working on a project where the developers wrote documentation. They delivered like 10, 12 different Word docs, and it was for the whole product release. So I can't yes, they needed to be edited, but we had to create a template. We had to have writers go and actually convert the stuff to RST, because these people, we didn't have it in place for them, or we had it in place, but they didn't do it. They went off and just wrote in Word, which is fine. Made it easy for me to edit. But the main thing we had to do is it was a deliverable, and there was no organization to it. So we had a lot of meetings about information architecture, and that's where I see the writers really making a difference, and other people can comment on that. But, we can get all the great content contributions, from all these different contributors that we want, but if we don't have a way to organize it really well and to deliver it really well, we're not going to be delivering good content. And so I still think there's a huge role for experienced writers in delivering really complex content, because we're just getting contributions. We're just getting content. There's got to be a whole framework for that, not just yes, it's the technical framework for it, but who's going to organize it? Who's going to know that this should follow this, and this needs to be, and this needs to link to that, and make all those connections, and make the templates and all of that. The editor's not going to do that. Writers need to do that. I think. I don't want to do it.
No, I totally agree. And I started as a technical writer in this organization that I'm at now, and the main sourcing of content really came from the community, from our open source repo, in addition to support, using support as a funnel for content. And I've since transitioned into the product release cycle documentation, where we have actual deliverables and things like that. And we're sourcing content, similarly than I did previously with support. Only now I'm also building the layouts, design, information architecture, and also the vehicle that delivers it. So as a writer myself, Docs like Code is a fundamental tool to being able to do my job.
Yeah.
I have a whole list of questions. What time do you guys want to go home? No. I'm just kidding. I guess one of the things, and Rachel just touched on it, and I know for me, coming to Rackspace, I had worked at IBM, and we kind of I had contributed to code bases, contributed content to code bases, and so I was somewhat familiar with that, the mechanics of doing that, and comfortable in a coding environment. But I was still on the periphery of the whole development process. And so I found when I came to Rackspace and actually learned about open source that it has completely changed my relationship to basically products and services that are developed as software. Before I basically have gotten a lot more confidence that I do know things that can contribute and improve. I always did it kind of quietly in the background, but now when you have public pull requests and things, the conversation is public, which is very difficult at the beginning. But I just wanted to hear some stories about how people's relationship to documentation has changed in places where you've adopted the Docs like Code approach. And I know we've talked about product management or marketing, and we've kind of touched on it, but I'd love to hear some stories about that.
I'm trying to think of a recent one. So in the job I'm in now, I'm a technical product manager. And so I'm actually starting to do more customer success analysis and how docs shape that. And we have a doc site and a support site, right? So there's a lot that goes into that. And a specific story even recently is we're trying to come up with ways to make sure that the customer success journey is mapped right. And I've even had to think about, well, why do people launch an instance on OpenStack anyway? Or more recently, we've made specific storage decisions for our product. And so I actually did the 4 levels of why. Well, why would they choose Ceph, this particular distributed storage system, right? And so I think that it does make you, it's not that Docs like code makes you do that, it's that collaborating across orgs makes you do that. Especially when I'm like knee deep in 1,000 support tickets that are all about like, why can't I have ephemeral storage? Oh yeah, I have to explain that. So yeah, I'm trying to think of other like productization examples. What about in REST APIs? When Eric Holscher read this book to write the foreword, which, thank you, Eric, way to go. He read an early preview and he's like, you barely touched on REST API documentation, yet it's totally integral to why this is going to be a successful technique. So I took a weekend and wrote a heck of a lot more. But even so, like, I don't think that, so REST APIs are basically let you do HTTP, protocols. There's only like 5, get, put, post, patch, delete. I don't know the other. Yeah. Where, these commands just go over the line and over the internet or whatever. And it's a way of, you can productize a REST API because it gives avenues into your services that people can then do a lot of things with, right? Like the Twitter API has spun out these entire, ecosystems. Well, in 2000, I got to think of the stats. Like in 2005, there were a handful of REST APIs, maybe under 1,000. Now there are 10,000 REST APIs tracked publicly on programmable web, right? And that doesn't even tell you how many are internal. So I think that that's another thing where the documentation for REST APIs is a super specific way to make a REST API a successful product and help you productize, weaponize your REST API, your services. It's a way to speak to your services. And so if your docs can explain why would you even do this thing with a tweet, then you are going to make that API experience so much better. I think like Jacob Kaplan-Moss talks the best about some of his ideas around developer documentation. So there's a whole chapter, section, we didn't even call them chapters hardly, about REST API docs. And, that's a deep and wide topic because it's still very new. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it kind of talks around some of the things that I find interesting. So.
I have a comment. Yeah. Before here, I went to the pub and I had a beer and I was talking about you saying productize. Oh. And then another guy said, if that's a word, it shouldn't be.
Sorry. Good to know. If that was Steve. Yes. You knew it. I knew it.
Sorry.
I like to make up words.
No, you didn't make it up. It's a word.
It is a word that people make up. Yeah.
Sorry.
More questions? This way first.
I hear you talk about risks, about being ready to encounter this new situation, the situation with your tech writer colleagues at OpenStack. But I'm also hearing opportunities for people to do more with documentation. I've heard of tools like Write Good, which I think can and should be incorporated into continuous integration to say, hey, you have these questions with the docs, and you can do things better. There are other tangential tools like Swift Playgrounds, where you can incorporate your product into the documentation. I mean, to me, these are all opportunities to do better with docs and get to the point where developers will say we'll want to code like docs like code.
Yep. Steals the mic.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was. Oh, it was about, we did have a situation when there were 8 writers on the team and we started pushing this, having the developers write more of the documentation. One writer said, am I going to lose my job? And I'm just like, no, instead we get to do the really, really, really fun stuff. Information architecture, coaching, coming up with training slides for the developers. And there's a lot of psychology in there because you can't go all in heavy-handed, like, do it like this, do it like this. But there's so much more to do. The information architecture to me is much more interesting, developing those templates, developing that friendship with the developers and sitting with them and laughing about why we use words like this and they don't. And so there's so much more I think that writers can do. So I think if any of you all encounter writers that are scared of losing your jobs when developers start writing, say actually increases our job security, believe me. So
That's how I feel.
Yeah, adds to the value. Yeah.
No, I kind of feel like as an editor, I kind of, even though it's hard, I feel like I have job security forever. And you know what? I just jinxed myself. I'm probably going to get laid off tomorrow and never get another job. But, the role of editing becomes a lot more important. Of course, everything else that Tana said is way more important, but at least, we've got that.
I just have one comment, which is that I don't think GitHub is all that important, honestly. I think what it is kind of back to my intercourse joke, it's a social lubrication between developers and writers. And it has opened up the conversation and kind of introduced us to each other. There you go.
Yeah. Level playing field.
Sorry.
That's, yes.
All right. This is actually just going back to Margaret's question, sort of about like how, I think it was something along the lines of how your relationship with documentation has changed since sort of moving to this pattern. And for me, what was really interesting, so we just recently pushed out a very first release of a new product that meant writing a ton of documentation. And like a really important transition that I had to go through was sort of like no longer, I don't know, it was like I couldn't be perfect anymore. Like, so like before when I was writing documentation on my own, it was like, I was obsessive. I was editing everything and it had to be perfect before I would let it out the door. And then all of a sudden when all these developers were piling on and adding content, it was like, there was no way that I was going to be able to go through and like make that all good. And so like, it was like we were driving down to a release date. It was like, okay, like I actually have to make myself be okay with good enough. Like I need to get it out the door. It needs to be good enough. It needs to be clear enough that people can understand it. And like, that has to be okay. And like, it was a really interesting, like perception change that happened. Like this was my first real project where like I was collaborating with developers. We were all working in the same repository, like getting out a project. And anyway, so like that was a really interesting shift for me as a writer going to working in this mode. So anyway, just wanted to add that.
That's good. Yeah.
Stand here awkwardly.
Well, I could also tell. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Okay, I think it's kind of interesting that you've sort of left out a step, I think. One of the things that you haven't really done, at least from what you've said anyway, is you haven't studied how a developer works. In other words, what is their process for writing and publishing code? And I can tell you it's a 3-step process. You write the code, find out if it compiles. Next, you write a test script to see if it actually works. And then you run it against the test cases to make sure they work. And if they all pass, then you publish the code. Yeah. All right, that's the bottom line. Well, that's really different than writing. That process is really different from writing. And I think that's something that you're really going to have to make a huge leap for developers, is to break from that process that they've just got ingrained in their brain about how things are supposed to work.
But some of those I love to borrow heavily from. We actually caught a broken link before it got built last week because of a script. So I think there are ways to borrow, totally take that, like tests and scripts. Yeah.
Just to respond to that, I think that it is the exact same process already as what developers use. Right here, it says like write, review, test, merge, build, deploy, repeat. I can't think of a developer process that exists outside of those. Because the reviewer could be a peer review.
Like I think it's the syntax that's like the first time I had to like pass Python Pep 8, it was brutal, right? Spaces, what? So I think that there is something to be said for the fact that they will mindlessly let their tests be their guide, and a writer has to be like, does this make sense at all? Could my customer read this and do something, amazing with what I've described? So I'll borrow what I like and reject what I don't.
I'm going to say while I walk over that we do actually have tests here at Rackspace for all of our code.
For all of our docs. All of your docs,
Yeah. Well, I think that was a good point, that there is no test you can run to make sure that the Ukrainian writers put it in an article, because they skip articles. So I guess you could write a script to test for that.
There probably is one, but we don't use it. Yeah.
I've totally forgotten the other thing I was going to say.
Well, English syntax is really ugly and impossible, and that's why article checking is hard,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Now I remember what I was going to say is, Kelly, you were talking about editing in Word and doing diffs and tracking changes. There's a tool, Fisheye, that developers seem to like, and that might be a nice compromise for you, because you can get a little more detailed, and they feel very comfortable in Fisheye. So, yeah, that was it.
I think one thing we're missing is that is our role as advocates for the customer. We're taking things from a customer point of view and seeing, okay, does the product work? And when we're doing it right, it in a flow that's as similar as possible to how developers actually develop and test and so on. We can incorporate ourselves into the agile process. One thing I'm finding, and it works maybe 20% of the time, when we're successful, we jump into a developer PR, help evaluate it, maybe even comment on the code, say this is supposed to be a 400 code instead of a 200 code, or something silly like that. We're able to get in, we're able to test what the developer is trying to do, and participate in the process and start our work early from there and get to the goal of a complete, documented, and tested product at the end of Agile sprints.
Is it Mike, was it? Or, yeah, I want to follow up on what you said, because I think that really is probably the differentiator in what coders can do and what writers can do. We are user advocates. Now, I like to build on the old joke about the blind man and the elephant, and say that, a lot of documentation is about describing what the parts of the elephant are. This is the leg, this is the trunk. If you lift the tail, there's interesting stuff there. And on some level, what and this is very true of API documentation, especially how it's been automated, where all of the reference, you can turn the crank and get a reference to a set of APIs. However, what I've found is that that's the beginning, that's the foundation, but no customer developer wants to be thrown a set of Java docs and be told to figure out what this thing is for, right? So the layer we provide is, okay, what is the customer trying to do with this? Agile methodology has helped a lot, because they write in terms of use cases. They try to, if they're doing it right, they're saying, as a customer, I am trying to do this, right? But I think where we add value is in aggregating that. And to speak to how does that compare to code repositories? It's really easy to answer that question. You can basically commingle documentation and code pieces for what is the reference parts, but you end up really needing to have more of a collaborative area, right, of its own, Docs living as its own, to cover these broader use cases that don't align to just one section of code, or it requires, we're going to cover these 5 pieces of code. So this is kind of a pep talk for, this is really the cool part of our job, right? Because you really can automate the reference part of it, but you really can't automate the empathy with the customer and figuring out what they want to do with it.
Figuring stuff out fast and
So
writing amazing.
We don't care about what the leg of the elephant looks like. We want to ride the elephant.
Right.
And that's an entirely different proposition.
Right. Paint the elephant's toenails. You had one.
Yeah, I'm just curious, user testing for docs. What do you guys typically do? Is it written, tested by you, and then shoved out the door? I feel like as a tech writer, especially when I worked at a place like Rockwell, that very complex software, I go in not knowing what the hell I'm doing, and I kind of at the end of it, I feel like, oh, okay, well, I know how this works. And the freshness is gone. And so maybe I'm not able to see it from, the user perspective where it's like really complex and like all these things that you can do. And it's kind of like a shit show when you look at it, really. It's like so many options. So I'm just kind of curious what that process is, if anything.
Do you have one or an example?
We don't do it. I mean, the writers, we kind of QA our own stuff, which is not a very good idea ultimately, but we just don't have the bandwidth.
Or like support analytics, I don't know.
So at Cisco, we work on our own subdomain sites for docs.metacloud.com and support.metacloud.com, so we can use web analytics to watch where they go, where they came from. Or you look at like bounce rate and exit rate and see if they're reading it for a long time or if they're just like, I'm out, that's not answering my question. Or, you kind of have to, the problem is you do have to interpret and you could be wrong.
Yeah, or if they leave the page quickly, that it may be that they found
They
their
solved their
answer,
problem.
and that means that you're awesome.
And that means you're great. Yeah. So I think that's the trouble with web analytics. I think one thing I did at Rackspace was I finally learned enough Python to start using one of the SDKs myself. Boy, did that bring a lot of empathy to the table. Like we bury a token it was something like I had to figure out how to parse a dictionary to get a thing, a list item out of the dictionary. And I was like, why do we do that to people? And I mean, and you also think like everybody else knows Python, they must be better at this. But it gave me that sense of like, oh man, I got to kind of describe that this token is this little gem in the middle of this long list of stuff. So that was my user testing. Yeah. But I want to one of the things I'm doing is I'm trying to do customer voice of the customer for content, and I'm not totally sure how you do that yet. So, but I'm learning a lot about voice of the customer for product stuff, and so I think it's interviews and web stats and reading tickets that are written in their voice and trying to tell stories. And I was reading tickets and this guy had to drive 4 to 5 hours to get into a data center to make sure that their network was set up right. And I'm like, man, I don't know how to empathize with that in my docs, but now I know his tale of driving 4 hours for this particular network config that we just wrote about. Right. Wow. Yeah.
Okay.
So with regards to user testing, in my experience, it starts at the top of an organization, and it's user testing and user research. Research is what informs product decisions, and then documentation decisions, kind of like as a trickle-down effect. So for like my team, being able to do user research specifically on documentation, we may not have bandwidth for a writing team of 2 people, but we certainly have research to rely on to help kind of like guide our decisions so that we can make assumptions on data, or we can make documentation and decisions that are based on data and research instead of assumptions.
That's data, yeah.
I would just like to say that I learned a lot about this from Write the Docs. At they have 2 conferences a year, and there's a lot of support presentations by people. And actually, Rachel came from a support background, but I actually am kind of working on this a little bit right now. I'm trying to anyway. Is building those bridges with the support team, because they're talking to the customers and they know when stuff isn't documented well. Well, they know when people can't do stuff. And so a lot of times they document it internally for themselves, but that the customers don't see that. And one of the things that I also learned is that support people don't know very much about what's in the documentation. And so they're not always directing people to the right place. And so when you start collaborating, then you get some of that. It's not really user testing, but you get feedback about the quality of the content and where problems are. And there's, like I said, plenty of, if you go to the YouTube channel for Write the Docs conferences, they have just any number of talks. And we actually had Bree Hilmer. She talked at one of our meetups. We actually watched her presentation from Write the Docs remotely, and then she took questions and answers. And I actually think that's a really key part of that collaboration, again, is a really key part of us being able to do better. And actually, because we have gotten some more automation and also help with the writing of the content, what it does open up is it opens up more time to do some of these other things so that you can produce better docs in the first place.
One super quick thing. An easy win for measuring comprehension is adding a one question survey at the end of a doc in the footer that says, was this helpful? Yes, no, and then an option to leave a comment. But then you have to be committed to reviewing that data and acting on it. But that's one of the ways that we source and measure comprehension efforts.
How long do we go to? Okay. I want to do like the last question drama, but if we don't have last question drama, that's okay. Okay.
Well, I know we wish we could do a little bit more user research, but recently I realized we have our first consumers of our documentation, our support engineers, our sales engineers, the people who want to demonstrate the new features, they want to learn about it. We're fortunate that the first place they refer to it is the docs. They may go further and talk to developers after that, but they'll always have comments on what we do, and to me that's a form of user research right there.
Oh yeah, I agree. Let's take discussion to after so we can turn off the recording, but let's go ahead and like close it up. Say thank you all for coming and asking good questions and having good discussion. So, okay.
Anne there was a question about the print copy. I was really excited that there is a print copy because I like the cover. And there's something about electronic books that you can't really appreciate the cover. But anyway, it's available. She's going to be at the Write the Docs conference, and she actually has some here if you can purchase through PayPal, and you can have them autographed by the authors. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that. And there's also, it's available on lulu.com. Is that right?
Just go to docs.co.com.
Right, there you go.
Yep, and then you can buy it from anywhere.
That's right, yes.
Yep.
What? DocsLikeCode.com. Vanna White and I, best friends.